Okay, good. So thanks a lot and a warm welcome to our session in the afternoon, which is on the Rio synergies, so the synergies of the Rio Convention and how agroecology and restoration can contribute to the climate, the biodiversity and the land targets. My name is Martina Fleckenstein. I'm with WWF International in our Global Food Program, and I will moderate this session. First of all, just a little bit an introduction in the topic. I think we are on a very important crossroad. Only 7 years to 2030, and there are huge challenges. The challenges are, first of all, the implementation of the global biodiversity framework and the Montreal targets, which had been agreed last year in December. We have the climate national determined contribution, the national adaptation plans, the NDCs, which are still not ambitious enough, and we need more ambitious MDCs and to fulfill or to reach a 1.5 target. And we have the land degradation neutrality targets, which are aligned with SDG 15.3. And for all, we have only 7 years. We all know there is a huge implementation gap, and land is one of the common ground where we think that all the Rio Convention could come together. We have land, for example, in the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework in Target 2, but also in other targets. We have land with the commitments in the NDCs and the commitments in the NDN. And this session is about to explore how agroecology and restoration could contribute to strengthen the synergies. And I'm very happy that we have a very interesting speaker and a panel discussion later this afternoon. We have representatives from government, from science, from civil society. And I would like to ask our first speaker, who is online, and I see he is online here, Sebastian Lesch. Sebastian is the head of the Agricultural Division of the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ of Germany, based in Berlin. Sebastian, welcome to our session today. Sebastian, your division is responsible for a wide range of topics, from the agriculture trade to global agriculture supply chain. You are involved in a lot of the international agriculture research and policies. And what we want to hear a little bit from you is how you deal with strengthening the synergies between the three Rio Convention. What does it mean in context with agri-food system? And where do you see challenges and also opportunities, and how is your ministry dealing with this topic? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and greetings to Bonn. I'm based in Berlin, as you were saying. Thanks for the kind introduction. I'll be in Bonn for the event from tomorrow, but right now I'm still in Berlin, so I'm with you virtually. I hope you'll excuse myself for that, but I'm very happy to be with you today and to have this discussion with you. Rio Synergies is the headline of this session, of this discussion, and obviously at the focus and the keyword of the discussion today. Climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation, we cannot address one without the other two. We are facing multiple environmental crises. Those crises are closely interlinked with each other. Soils, forests, peatlands, other land-based ecosystems are very important carbon sinks. They host the diversity of species and the habitats, but they also provide the foundation for crop production, for livestock. And if you look at an increasingly drier and degraded world, all of these aspects are at risk and they mutually reinforce each other. If we're looking back into history in 1992, those three Rio Conventions, the UNFCCC, the CBD, the CCD, they were born as three separate instruments. Now we are more than 3 decades later, and the challenge to meet the targets force us to look at the manifold potential for synergies and for joint ambition between those three conventions. And obviously, land, as you were saying, is a very important common denominator, probably the strongest common denominator between those three Rio target systems, because that's where targets overlap most and pursue common goals. So those are the biggest areas of leverage for Rio synergies, if you want. In very practical terms, national level action plans, the NBSAPs, the NDCs, the LDN targets, They often share very similar targets, but they're largely uncoordinated. And if you go for integrated approaches like land restoration and agroecology, they are exemplary for measures which are creating significant co-benefits for all the three targeting systems. At the ministry, we are, of course, aware of this potential. We promote the use of synergies across the Rio Conventions in all the projects that my ministry supports. And the results of some of those projects show us that if we use those integrated approaches, such as agroecology, that can then create synergies in practice. Let me give you an example. We've been funding a global program on soil protection, rehabilitation for food security. It's called ProSoil in the English version. And this program supports countries in Africa, countries in Asia by promoting integrated soil fertility management and agroecological methods. The results of this project meet targets of the UNCCD. That's the first thing you think of when you think of soil protection rehabilitation, but it also meets targets of the UNFCCC, as well as also indirectly contributing to the global biodiversity framework under the CBD. And if you look at the results of the program, it's been running for 8 years. It has led to the rehabilitation of agricultural land, more than 500,000 hectares, with an average of 40% yield increase, with 1.7 million beneficiaries. But it's also been sequestering a total of 500,000 tons of carbon equivalent. And the program increased the resilience against climate change. So that's UNFCCC, resilience against volatile prices of agriculture inputs. And it also creates new job opportunities for better livelihoods through the introduction of circular economy strategies for improved and sustainable soil nutrient management. So that's UNCCD stuff, if you want. And it also supports biodiversity within and above soils. For example, through diversifying and introducing locally adapted crop varieties, replacing synthetic fertilizer use through organic input, establishing hedges, other agroforestry practices. So a lot of CBD stuff, if you want, targeting the three conventions in one project. Germany is increasing its commitments to implementing agroecological approaches, and I'm happy to share that Germany, in this case, it's a co-production of our Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development and also the Ministry of Food and Agriculture. So the German government is currently in the process of joining the Agroecology Coalition coming out of the UN Food System Summit, which is going to further strengthen its engagement for agroecology at the national and international level. This is going to happen very soon. I have another example. In Rwanda, we are supporting the Rwandan government with a synergies assessment to make use of economic opportunities arising from a better alignment of the convention and their restoration targets. And we will hear in a minute in this session from our keynote speaker about the results of this study, which was mandated by the three Rio Secretariats at the same time, and which was conducted by our Economics of Land Degradation initiative jointly with the, Bonn University. So I hope that these practical examples can show that we can better respond to crisis if we think and implement approaches together across sectors and also across conventions. And that allows us to better fight malnutrition, combat climate change and land degradation, safeguard biodiversity, so for all the goals of those three conventions, and bring about the necessary transformation of agriculture and food systems. If we look at the food crisis that was aggravated by the war against Ukraine, that reinforced our understanding that we need to overcome this silo thinking. And that's exactly what this dry topic of synergies in the end is about. At the convention level, we feed in these learnings and practical cases to make use of those synergies. I'm at least trying to do this very strongly. I'm the German national focal point for the UNCCD, but we're also trying to bring this into the other conventions. And what we need now, I think, is to bring those Rio synergies and the use of integrated approaches, such as land restoration and agroecology, to practice and to scale. And that needs both a discussion about practical steps to take inspiration for decision makers, and it also needs those decision makers to take on that inspiration. That's why we are having today's session. I'm very much looking forward to it, and I'm giving the floor back to Bonn and to Martina. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you for your inspiring and encouraging input, because it's great to hear and to see that the German BMZ is already connecting the three conventions. And I think soil is an excellent example how livelihood and nature could come together. And also it's encouraging to hear that Germany now has joined the Agroecology Coalition. And let me take also the opportunity to introduce the co-organizer or the organizer of this session, and this is also already an integrated approach. It's the UNCCD, it's the Agroecology Coalition, we have Biovision with us, we have the economics of land degradation and the WWF, and I think you see they are really, we're coming from different angles, but we are working together, and this also strengthens this overall really collaborative approaches which are important for the implementation or for the strengthening of the implementation on the ground. And Sebastian, happy to see you probably in the next days here in Bonn. Have a safe trip to Bonn, and thanks for being here. Getting from the government now to the science, and this leads me to our next speaker, Elisha Mirzabes. He's from the University of Bonn. He's also consultant with Unique Forestry. And I think what is really important, Elisha, you are also the author of the Economic of Land Degradation report, which is really something like a Bible on this topic. So it's really great also for me to meet you in person. And you also worked for 6 years as socio-economist at the International Center of Agriculture Research in dry areas. But today, and what we will hear from you, is your research on the economics of harmonized national action agendas for land restoration and food security on the example of Rwanda. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for your interest in coming for this session. At the beginning of my presentation, let me emphasize that this is a joint work together with Ministry of Agriculture and Animal Resources of Rwanda, and I'm very happy that Petra Nyonsenga, NDC project manager from the ministry, is here, one of the co-authors of the report. We also work together with GIZ, ELD, Secretariat, and of course our work was supported by the BMZ, Federal Ministry, German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. So, as it was already mentioned by the previous speaker, land restoration is a multifaceted solution for land degradation, for climate change, for biodiversity loss, but also for food insecurity and malnutrition. Probably for this reason, land restoration activities, conservation, sustainable land management is at the heart of action agendas of both CBD, UNCCD, and Climate Change Convention. So taking all that into account, in our case study, we looked at the potential synergies from joint programming and implementation of land restoration activities using Rwanda as a case study country. Here you can see the commitments, the targets, land restoration targets by Rwanda under the different conventions. Under LDN, it's slightly more than 1 million hectares. Under NDCs, 805,000 hectares. And there's a very big commitment under the Bonn challenge of 2 million hectares. In total, under biodiversity convention as well, there are some targets like at least 10%, 10.3% of the country needs to be protected. So if you add up all these commitments, you come up with the number 3.87 million hectares. Rwandan territory is 2.6 million hectares. So what does it mean? It means that these targets are overlapping. They are not separate. So that's already kind of a reason without anything else for closer coordination of activities. Before we talk about synergies, let me perhaps clarify how we approach this synergies and trade-offs discussion in our work. Synergies for us means two things. Synergies need to increase effectiveness or efficiency. Effectiveness means together, working together, we can achieve more than by working separately. And efficiency means by working together, we achieve the same objective at a lower cost. Yeah? And from the trade-off perspective, trade-off is when we are promoting one objective, it is having negative impact on the achievement of another objective. So this is how we define synergies and trade-offs in this work. Now looking at this land restoration, conservation, sustainable land management targets by Rwanda under the three conventions, you can see that in the heat map, you can see here that a big part, for example, on conservation activities is done under MBSAP, biodiversity. That's also not a big surprise. big part of the activities. So all of the action plans have something along these three lines: conservation, SLM, restoration. But then there is also some more emphasis under each convention, like SLM would be more emphasized under LDN and restoration under NDC. But then when you try to look at the content of each of these targets, and you can see in the Venn diagram, you can see that there are really quite a big number of overlaps. So that means the same kind of activities are being targeted, being planned under different conventions. So this, and Rwanda is one of the most well-organized countries in the world in terms of planning, implementing, organizing these land restoration activities. And there we can see a lot of kind of consistency, complementarities, but also here already we can see that there is strong requirement for collaboration because there are so many overlaps and so many places where synergies can help all the achievement of all the objectives. Looking at the land restoration and land degradation picture in Rwanda during the last 20 years, 2 decades, we can clearly see that the country was very successful, especially in terms of expanding agroforestry areas. This, to a large extent, there was also cropland expansion. This came at the expense of savannas and grasslands. Contrary to some suggestions, it did not come through encroachment or deforestation. There was deforestation, but very little. So here you can see both economic gains and losses because of these changes on this granular map. Now, looking into the future, so when we modeled the costs and benefits of land restoration activities, not only land restoration, but also conservation, SLM, so corresponding to avoid, reduce, reverse categories of LDN, we can see that there is an annual investment need of about $300 million in Rwanda. We don't have the up-to-date numbers, but sometime back, annual investments were around 100 million. Yeah, in the last. So there is some gap which could be filled. But we also see that most of these land restoration activities are economically profitable. You can see this in this map on costs and benefits, where you can see in many areas returns, economic returns from land restoration. Each dollar invested in land restoration will give back from up to 3, in many cases, from between 2 and 3 US dollars of return. Now, these investments, these land restoration activities have some trade-offs. But also, depending on what you prioritize, you can select those locations. If the priority is food security, then these are the green areas that needs to be invested first, because we know we have all scarce resources. All countries have scarce resources. And by the way, I should mention that one of the reasons why Rwanda was so successful, because government of Rwanda is the main investor in land restoration activities. About 70% of money spent on land restoration in Rwanda is coming from the government budget. If you are emphasizing on carbon sequestration, on biodiversity, because it's about forest, and then you need to go to these red areas. But one solution which can bridge this thing, both sequester carbon, increase biodiversity, and improve food security in Rwanda, this is agroforestry. And that's why you see a lot of this agroforestry expansion. Together with agroforestry and reforesting those degraded, some part of the degraded forest, Rwanda can sequester about 13.5 million tons of carbon. That, if you put into perspective, this is 2.5 times more than the annual emissions by Rwanda. We also did a modeling of benefits of coordinated action. Because of the time limitations, I cannot go too much into the details of the methodology. I'll be happy to talk after the side event or during the question and answer session. So what we find that in the 5 distinct areas where synergies would emerge, the biggest synergies of coordinated action will come from joint activities on monitoring and evaluation. And then on research and capacity building and awareness raising. So if we add up all this together, they are not separate, they can be done together. If we add up all this, it will improve the efficiency by 15%. So it will reduce implementation costs by 15%. So if you assume that we are investing in all this $300 million per year that is that are needed for Rwanda to achieve all these targets by 2030, then by coordinating our actions, aligning our agendas, we are saving $45 million every year. So in conclusion, what are my kind of some few takeaways? Joint spatial mapping of land conservation, SLM, and restoration across the Rio Conventions. That will help a lot with very effective planning and achievement of these objectives. And of course, as we saw from the numbers, joint monitoring and evaluation system tracking the achievement of targets under the 3 conventions. And lastly, but not least, harmonized action plan, national action plan, where conventions could also support so that we have aligned action agendas on this in Rwanda. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes. Thanks a lot, and very, very interesting report, and I think it would be great maybe if you could share also later on the link to this report. I think it was really interesting to see, first of all, to point out really the importance also of land and spatial planning, which is, by the way, also in the Kunming-Montreal target, it's target 1, where we want to have a deeper dive on the spatial and land use planning. Also to be aware of the trade-offs. So if you go for agroforestry, maybe we lost other ecosystems like grassland savannas in this context. But what I think is really important and to emphasize is really by an improved efficiency, we have a gain. We have a 50% gain, also a financial gain. And as you mentioned, this is economically profitable, and it's really worthwhile. And we're looking also in the next 2 years, 2025, the NDCs have to be updated, and the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan also have to be updated for the next COP next year. So there are a lot of opportunities really to improve also the synergies, and it's good to start the discussion here and to continue the discussion. Having said this, one very important entry point, and therefore I'm very happy that we have this event together with the Agroecology Coalition and Biovision, is the agroecology approaches. And John Garcia Ulloa will tell us a little bit more about the evidence and the benefits of agroecology to deliver on these targets. John, you are the program manager of the policy and advocacy team in Biovision, and you have a long-standing experience on agroecology, and we really would like to listen, why is agroecology important for the implementation of the Rio targets? What is already happening on country level? So it's really interesting to see a little bit some examples. And where are the key areas where agroecology could help countries to address a synergistically approach on climate change, on biodiversity, on land degradation, and finally also on food security, which I think is really important and what Alisher also mentioned in his presentation. So over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for being here. It's great to have this presentation to be able to communicate to you what some of the evidence that is showing that agroecology can deliver on the 3 fronts, land, biodiversity, and climate. I was tasked to give you this presentation. Can I have the pointer? Thank you very much. It's all right. I was tasked to give you a very fast presentation, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to go into all the details, especially on the country examples. But let me just walk you through some of the evidence that we have. First of all, what I think is important is to be able to capitalize on the synergies between the 3 conventions. The 3 Rio Conventions, we need to have a food systems lens. And this is something that has been a recurring theme in different side events that have been presented today and that will be presented during this week. Why is this important? Because as Sebastian has said at the beginning, and Martin has also pointed out, and as well as Alisher, all of these impacts are interrelated. There is our current sustainable food systems are responsible for 30% of the global gas emissions, 70% of the racial biodiversity loss, 52% of degraded agricultural land. So to be able to address this, we need to think holistically, we need to think about changes at the system level, and this is starting to be recognized by international scientific bodies like the IPCC, EPBS, and so on. And we have made progress towards including this lens in international policy, the policy level. We have the United Nations Food System Summit in 2021. There are the food days now at the COPs, which is an important step towards including this lens. And we have many calls for actions now coming from different organizations about really addressing this in a systemic level. And what we want to show you here today is that agroecology is the way to address the sustainable or the unsustainable issues that we have with our food systems. Why? Because agroecology is conducive to better outcomes for the three fronts, as I said at the beginning. It's a holistic approach. It has a focus on multifunctionality, multi-dimension benefits, and long-term benefits. It's based on a broad range of elements and principles that go beyond agroecosystem considerations. It also includes many organizational and societal aspects. What is interesting is that by design, agroecology, the principles, they speak directly to many of the issues that are relevant for the three conventions. For example, biodiversity is one of the principles that guides agroecological approaches. Soil health, that is so important for the land degradation approaches, is also part of the principles that is included within agroecology. And for climate, we have synergies, we have input reductions where there's many significant emissions coming from. There are many other aspects, and I think each of these principles really are in one way or the other connected to the challenges that each of the conventions are trying to address. So what we also think is, and what we also know is that there is a strong evidence that agroecology really can deliver on these three fronts. And let me just walk you through some of this evidence. Let's start with biodiversity, and agroecology practices result in significant positive benefits for biodiversity. This is a meta-analysis that was done 3 years ago with different agroecological practices on the rows and different aspects of soil biodiversity, for example, on the columns. What I want you to focus is not on the details, but the amount of green that you see in this table. The darker the green, the more positive benefits agroecology has on different aspects of soil biodiversity. And as you can see, for most of the things that were measured, that were analyzed in this study, that encompass 11 meta-analyses and up to 500 studies, most of it is positive. The same can be said about wider biodiversity benefits, for example, species richness, abundance, in different agroecosystems. And this again is part of that study. This was 7 meta-analyses, including up to 100 studies. And again, you see the overwhelming color green, meaning that there is significant positive correlation between the agroecological practices and the outcomes, the biodiversity outcomes coming in these landscapes. But agroecology also contributes to conservation beyond the farm. So it's not just about soil biodiversity, it's not just about agrobiodiversity, but it's also about the landscape effects. And I'm going to illustrate this using one of these typologies that the conservation community use for 3 types of landscapes: production landscapes, or agricultural landscapes, mosaic landscapes, and intact or semi-intact landscapes. And what we can see is that agroecology, for example, support pollinators and insectivorous communities that are in declining production landscapes, can support the species movements and dispersal because it creates habitats and a more friendly matrix for species to move around, and can therefore connect or increase the ecological connectivity between protected landscapes in, for example, these intact places on Earth. This is just some of the few examples where agroecology can deliver benefits for biodiversity. There are many others that have been documented. Agroecological approaches also support climate change adaptation. There is strong evidence and high agreement on this. And again, this is a very text-heavy table, but I want you to focus on the green colors. The darker the green, the more a positive or a strong evidence and high agreement that the agroecology can deliver by climate adaptation benefits. Some of these aspects are related to protection of yields or production of food, but also to the maintenance and the ecosystem regulating services, for example, pollinators, pest control, but also environmental supporting services, like, for example, water and nutrient cycling. Again, this is work that has been analyzed by this study in 2021. 8 meta-analyses that were included in this analysis, and they were with up to 40,000 comparisons on the field and 3,000 experiments. So the bulk of evidence is huge for how agroecology can really deliver these benefits on climate change adaptation. And this is rooted in the fact that every principle of agroecology, of that circle that I showed you at the beginning, actually connects directly or relates directly with a principle of climate adaptation. And this is something that you can see in this figure. The figure is not complete, it's only for the first 7 principles. But what I want you to focus is on the black arrows. Every single principle that you see on the left in orange is connected to the teal color principles of adaptation. Agroecology not only contributes to adaptation, but also can contribute to mitigation through the increase of carbon in soils and reduce emissions, for example, from the agri-input use. And again, focus here on the green colors that you see on the table. And as you will see, there is low to medium relevance of the evidence for this. However, I have to make a note here. There are not many studies done that are actually looking into this topic. So this is a topic that is maybe worth expanding and looking more in depth. And finally, when it comes to land degradation, soil health, as we mentioned before, is one of those aspects that are really at the cross-cutting level for food system production, for food systems and for food production. And here we have, again, on the rows, different agroecological practices, and the columns, different aspects of soil health. And again, focus on the dark green colors. As you will see that they signify positive correlation. And as you can see, out of these meta-analysis, of these 8 meta-analyses that analyze up to 500 studies, the evidence is overwhelmingly positive towards the effects that agroecology can have on soils and soil health. So we do believe that agroecology is a pathway for synergistic solutions. First, because this it inherently includes resilience and resource efficiency principles, which is the basic basis for delivering benefits across the 3 conventions. What we think is more important, or as important, sorry, is that this agroecology can capitalize or can help materialize these synergies through the societal and governance principles. It basically provides a single vehicle for organizing your food systems and be able to deliver on all fronts. To be able to materialize the potential of agroecology, we needed to be included in international and national policy frameworks. And as Martina has pointed out at the beginning, it's a great step that the agroecology is now explicitly mentioned in the GBF and the CBD Convention. We needed to be explicitly mentioned in further text coming out of the UNFCCC or UNCCD. This is really a call for action, something that could really capitalize or enhance, boost the power, the transformation power of agroecology. We are also launching today a policy brief about precisely calling for countries to start revising the national biodiversity and action strategies and action plans, the MSAPs, and my colleague will be, and myself will be handing some of these cards for dissemination later, if any of you is interested. And with that, I thank you, and yeah, if any questions, I'm happy to answer them after the session, or you can visit our website, agroecologypool.org, where we have all this evidence compiled and presented.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, John, and I really recommend to visit this website. It's very informative, and it gives you really, helps us also on the discussion about the efficiency of agroecology. And just to reiterate, there is now a huge opportunity. We have the Target 10, which is mentioning under the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is mentioning agroecology, and I hope, or we hope to see agroecology also stronger in the follow-up process of Coronivia, the new Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on climate actions for agriculture and food security. So that's also, and we hope we get out with a positive result during the next days or as one of the work programs for this group. We are at the end of the part one of this session. I will now hand over to Sophia. Sophia will moderate the panel discussion. She is the advisor on agriculture and climate change at GIZ. And over to you, Sophia, now, and the panelists.
Yeah, thank you, Martina. Welcome everyone to the panel discussion. I'm asking our panels to the front of the room. So thank you for presenting the evidence from Rwanda and also on agroecology as integrated approach. I would like to shift the focus now a little bit towards implementation and what action, next steps we need to really move the evidence to practice and to scale. And therefore we have three great ladies on the panel. I think we have a fourth one joining virtually. Is she already there, Esther? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So let me introduce our panelists. We have Miriam Medel in the middle, the lady in red. Ah, there are two ladies in red.
We're two ladies in red. Almost. From Mexico.
That's good. It's good. So Miriam Medel is the Chief of External Relations, Policy and Advocacy at the UNCCD Secretariat, with more than 20 years of experience in the field of diplomacy, international relations and sustainable development. And prior to joining the UNCCD in October 2020, she served at the UNFCCC. And previously, she was the political attaché of Mexico to Germany and has held several positions as a Mexican diplomat and multilateral negotiator. So happy to have you here and the UNCCD perspective. Then we have the other lady in red, dark red. This is Sol Garcia. Welcome. So she's the Director of Policies and Perspective and Climate Change within the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development in Mexico since 2018. She's coordinating the implementation of the National Strategy for the Sustainable Use and Conservation of Pollinators, and she is the National Strategy on Soils for Sustainable Agriculture in Mexico. And she is the Executive Secretary of the Sectoral Committee on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture and has recently been elected as the chair of the Latin American and the Caribbean Soil Partnership. Happy having you as country representative from Mexico.
Thank you.
And then our lady in black and colorful, we have Kelly Witkowski. I practiced the name before the session started. I hope it was good. Kelly Witkowski. Kelly is the manager of the Agriculture and Climate Action and Sustainability Program in the American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, the IICA in Costa Rica. And she's in charge of promoting more efficient, sustainable and low emissions agriculture and identifying and promoting innovations that can bring benefits to producers. So happy having you and presenting the perspective from the Technical Cooperation Institute. So Esther, is she with us? But I can't see her, but she can listen to us?
Yes, I am here. Good afternoon,
okay.
good morning, good evening to everyone.
That's really good. So I hear you, you hear us, that's good. So I can then present you. So you're hearing from there and there. This is Esther Penunia. She's joining virtually without movie, yeah. Esther Penunia is member of the steering committee of the Agroecology Coalition and Secretary General of the Asian Farmers Association for Sustainable Rural Development. This Asian Farmer Association, AFA, is a regional alliance of national farmer organizations in Asia and is offering a variety of services to farmers from policy advocacy, capacity building, knowledge management, business development, and thus also promotes farmers' rights to land, water, forest, and seeds. Esther, great seeing you. Now we have you on the screen. Happy having you and bringing in the perspective of an agroecology practitioner. Great having you. So warm welcome to all our panelists. Okay, so I would like to start with a question to you, Miriam. Because this is a series of events. Nina Bissom told me that this is the third event in a series, so it started 1 year ago at the UNCCD COP in Abidjan, and you have been on a panel. And I'm not citing you, don't be afraid. But you said that even though the Rio Convention have been born together, they have been addressed always in a siloed approach, but now, so you said this 1 year ago, you said now the political momentum is there to really move forward together. So since then, we had the UNCCD COP, UFF2C COP, we had the CBD COP, and now we are here. So what has changed? Where do we stand in discussions? Have we actually moved from discussion to action to implementation? And what are the ingredients that still are missing? Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it is very nice and a pleasure to be here. Yes, I do believe, I continue to believe, and perhaps I am overly optimistic, that there is political momentum. And actually, the fact that all of you are here is one token of that. I was earlier in a mandated event on something entirely different, a mandated event by the UNFCCC COP on gender and the different gender perspectives of their 3 Rio conventions. So, and it was also equally full. The fact that it was mandated is also good news. So I do believe there is finally some realization amongst member states that they need to move forward and break the silos and move into this whole of government approach, a whole of society approach to tackle these challenges. One thing that encourages me is the fact that at UNCCD COP, although it's the smallest of the gatherings, we managed to have the first food day in a Rio Conventions conference. And probably you think this is not controversial, this is not an issue, this is, why is that such a big deal? Well, trust me, it was a big deal. And maybe Dirk can talk about some of the controversies and some of the resistances to be discussing food systems in this coherent approach. So we went from that to have 3 food systems pavilions at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and then to have a fully fledged Rio Conventions pavilion with a lot of food systems conversation at the CBD COP, and then we have this. So the conversation is happening, and it is very encouraging. The only piece of evidence that encourages me is the existence of these studies. What Alisher and what John just did actually is extremely helpful because it provides us with the information and the data that we need to promote a transition to other type of practices. We didn't have that in previous moments. Maybe the studies were there or the information was there, but brought together in this type of, like packaged this way, it probably wasn't there before. I mean, we have been able, or we have decided to compare the LDN targets with the NDCs and with the NBSAPs. This wasn't done before. So it may seem a minor thing, but it's actually something very relevant. The last thing I will say, and then I will stop and I'm happy to engage in further questions, is we have also moved into the policy and advocacy area where we have Biovision presenting today a policy brief that actually has very practical recommendations for policymakers. And sometimes that is very important because people want to do things and it's not necessarily easy to go back from the conference or from the SBs, go back to your country and then, I mean, I have been a government officer before, so you go back and then you really don't know. You get 5 minutes with your minister or with your vice minister and you need to convey the message and you need to be able to start moving the needle in another direction. We at the UNCCD Secretariat, we produce a policy brief called Land Restoration to Safeguard Nature and Livelihoods. It is on the synergies between the CBD and UNCCD, and an analysis of the global biodiversity framework. So we hope this will also be taken as a contribution by parties, and we hope to embark with the other 2 secretariats and with every stakeholder and every willing party into this conversation on what does it really mean to work, to break the silos and to work in synergies, considering the trade-offs, but considering the very important benefits and the very limited finance that we have. So it is also a matter of maximizing the utilization of resources to address the different commitments that have been made by the parties in the respective multilateral spaces. I stop here for now. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Miriam. So I hear a little bit of optimism out of your statement. That's good. Okay, let's take the optimism and pass to you, Sol. So you are from a ministry in agriculture in Mexico. So I would like to know from your perspective or your experience, or maybe you can just tell us what is happening in Mexico. What are the actions, the concrete actions that you're doing towards the synergetic implementation of the target systems? What are the challenges and opportunities you see? And maybe also what support you would like to have from the secretariats or from the donor community or also from national level actors? Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, I have to start saying that we have been very lucky in the Ministry of Agriculture because there's this consciousness of the importance of working together. So we started from there, and within our instruments for planning, we have this public policy that is called the Secretariat program, and it has three main pillars, which is productivity, sustainability, and inclusion. So that, for me, was a very important way to start with. The other issue that has been helping us to collaborate is that we have our national law on climate change mandates that we coordinate among different ministries. So we have to come up with a special plan for climate change within the coordination of the Ministry of Environment. So we work with that, and we had these two umbrella instruments, the sectorial program, the special program for climate change. And from there we start with our policies. And these policies are trying to convey the three conventions, and not just in terms of trying to comply with them, but also how these three conventions are contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. So we have this big framework, and what we have now are, for example, the strategy for the conservation and sustainable use of pollinators, which deals with biodiversity and a very important ecosystem service. And within that strategy, we talk about the problems that climate change is causing to pollinators, just to set some examples. We also have a multi-annual plan for work of genetic resources for food and agriculture. I won't go into the details, but why are we working with this? Because we see also a clear link between conserving these genetic resources as a way to adapt to climate change, because there's where you have the genetics that may help you to adapt to different climate conditions. And the recent instrument that we have, the National Strategy for on Soils for the Sustainable Agriculture, has also this main connection with climate change, because we know that soils are the resource or are the linkage between biodiversity, because most biodiversity grows there. Most of our food comes from soils. And also, we know that some of the very important functions of soils are related to capture carbon. So for us, this strategy is also very important. So we have all these instruments, and we have them organized in this umbrella. And what we have done to identify clearly what are the synergies is that within a program that we have of climate in agriculture, we identified the actions of these instruments that contribute to adaptations, the actions that contribute to mitigation, and the actions that are synergistic. So we have this systemic approach that we are working with. And in terms of challenges, it's not easy because, for example, the National Strategy for the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Pollinators that now on I will call it UNCCD, because that's the short for it, and I won't repeat the whole name. That was constructed within the Environment Ministry and Agricultural Ministry, and you will say, well, it's natural that you work together because pollinators contribute to food and security and also to maintain biodiversity. But it's not easy because sometimes from one sector, you think on pollinators just bees, but no, pollinators are all these other organisms that many happen to live also in soil. So we have these connections. And it took us like 2 years and a half. Also, I have to admit that we had the pandemic in between, so it wasn't easy to construct. But I want to mention that we have the support of GIZ to get this UNCCD. And that was very, very useful because not just for the contributing to put us together, but also because it was a way to facilitate the dialogue. So I think that that's something that helped us. And right now we are very enthusiastic because finally, after almost 4 years, we got a project from GEF that is called Mainstreaming Biodiversity in Agroecosystems and Forestry. And we are working with this project with this view, systemic view of having there, considering soils, and I haven't mentioned it, but soils are also very important for the ecosystem function of filtering water, conserving water in soils, and that's a very precious resource in 70% of Mexico. So we are having these achievements. We are not totally there, but we are getting close to have this all together, and I think that support from organizations out there is very important. As Miriam was saying, we don't always have the financing for doing this work, but that will help. I hope I get all your questions for now, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sol. Yeah, I guess we all know how difficult cooperation can be, and maybe it's good to remember the figure that you mentioned, that what cost can be saved when collaborating and doing a joint monitoring and capacity building. I think we're 45, was it?
300 million.
Okay, so quite a lot. So maybe it helps when collaborating, remember this figure. But now I'm moving to Esther. I don't know if you see me. I see you now on the screen. Now I see you. Yeah, you're 1, 2, 3 times here. Okay, good to have you here several times. I just have a question to you. Agroecology as an integrated approach to move towards a synergetic implementation of the Rio Convention. So, what does it take in your view to really scale up this approach, and what support would you need also in terms of enabling environment? Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening from the Philippines. The speakers before me have spoken very clearly and with clarity about the synergistic implementation of targets across the 3 conventions. One of our members from the Philippines have been to Rwanda and was amazed at how their lands and hills were really full of trees and crops, and farmers that they interviewed and interacted with were happy with the kind of farming they are doing. While John from Biovision was speaking, I remember the farm of Aming and Dante Pajaron, a farming couple, beneficiaries of the Philippine government's land reform program. Since they became owners of the land they till, they became more responsible with the management and use of their land. In the first 10 years, they were practicing monocropping of rice, but they were not earning due to high cost of inputs. But with some extension work from the government and from the NGOs and their national farmers organization from which they are affiliated with, they shifted to integrated, diversified organic farming system. With their 2-hectare piece of land, they integrated crops, livestock such as ducks, chicken, and goats, fisheries through ponds, trees, both hardwood and fruit trees, as well as flowers, and doing nutrient recycling, composting, water harvesting. And after 10 years of doing agroecology, they say that they were able to send all their 5 children to school, and they were earning about 30,000 pesos a month, which is way above the minimum or the poverty line of the Philippines. So that is a very good success story of agroecology in a 2-hectare farm. Now, imagine family farmers account for 90% of all farms in the world. And 80% of these family farmers are small-scale men, women, and young farmers engaged in crops, livestock, fisheries, forestry, herding, and pastoralism. Right now, they are producing only 36% of the world's food. But if they transform from monocropping, from less diverse farming systems to agroecology, imagine the kind of diversity, the soil health, the resiliency that these family farmers can have in the future in 2030. Okay. So we think that agroecology is a pathway. It's a pathway, and it's very clear that they can deliver the commitments to the 3 conventions, the targets of the 3 conventions. A transition from conventional to agroecological production will be critical to achieve the climate, biodiversity, and land targets. Diversification at the field, farm, and landscape scale holds large potential to make food systems more sustainable. And what a previous speaker said, and what small-scale farms that we have observed in the fields of our members are good evidences that diversification of production systems would not compromise food security. Also very important, local context matters. And agroecology is site-specific because it factors in not only local biophysical and ecological conditions, but also local socio-cultural context. So what can be done to massively scale up so that millions of small-scale farmers can really do agroecological farming? First, we need political engagement and increased commitment to agroecological transformation. Like times 100% Rwanda's commitment, times 100% Mexico's commitment on agroecological transformation. More and more countries, if possible, 100% of the countries doing this commitment to agroecological transformation with 2 things, an agroecological transformation with emphasis on inclusion, involving family farmers, indigenous peoples, and local communities in crafting the synergies for the different action plan, as well as second, integration across ministries. It is important that agroecology is embedded in national development as in national food system transformation plans. It is essential that this is not just a concern of agriculture or environment ministries, but of many other ministries as well, including or perhaps especially the planning ministries or planning agencies, as well as those involved in budget and finance. It has to be tackled not only in multi-stakeholder fashion, but it should also take a multi-sectoral approach as well. Second thing that we think should be done, or where the action should be, is pushing for increased investment in these areas, in agroforestry, sustainable fisheries, sustainable pastoralism, integrated, diversified organic farming system across all landscapes. And third is facilitating co-creation and exchange of knowledge and experience on agroecology and biodiversity, conservation, and sustainable use, looking at co-benefits. Now, I happen to represent here the Agroecology Coalition, and I'm pleased to say that these three main things that we think should be done to scale up agroecology, these are also the three work streams that we have at the Agroecology Coalition, where we really work to accelerate the transformation of food systems through agroecology. The coalition has now 47 countries, happy to that Germany is included, as well as Switzerland, plus 100% organizations of farmers, indigenous peoples, research and philanthropic institutions, and UN agencies. And AFA is one of the active members of this coalition. In Hanoi last month, during the Global Conference on the Transformation We Need, the members of the Coalition of Agroecology in Asia had side meetings, and we said maybe we could do something on the ground so that we could really mainstream and upscale agroecology. So we were having this idea, for example, getting together governments, farmers organizations, and NGOs and research institutions like FAO, NG Farm, in something like farm to school meals, contributing to the feeding program of schools to increase the nutritional levels of school children, as well as promoting the neglected and underutilized species or forgotten crops. So this is to improve biodiversity, climate resiliency of the crops of farmers, as well as improving nutrition of children and society in general, because most of the neglected and underutilized species are high in nutrition, as well as are high in resiliency to droughts and floods. So these are our contributions. So I hope this helps in our conversation. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Esther. Thank you very much for the inspiring words and the call for action. So I will open later the floor for questions. I'm sure there are coming, some also addressed to you. Before that, I have one question to you, Kelly. So you, in your position at IACA, you have been supporting ministries of agriculture and other actors in Latin America to integrate climate change into sectoral development planning and action. And I was wondering, where do you see greatest support needs at the country level towards integrated approaches and planning, and also in terms of enabling environment? The floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everybody. I want to start out by saying that on a conceptual and theoretical level, I don't know that there's many people that would argue against creating these greater synergies, amongst the Rio Convention objectives. For us, the key question is how and the mechanics of this. As Sol said, they in the ministries in Mexico, they know that this is important, and they're working to address it. And I think that we have to think through, again, these enabling conditions, which is a very important question. And the first enabling condition that I would mention is actually not on a country level, but more on the high level from donors and international cooperation. And I think the will and increased language around integration of the conventions is very much welcome, and that we as the international community really have a responsibility to coordinate, not just to move more financing, but to make sure it's more impactful and more efficient. And I think that's a responsibility that's coming from the outside, but that can be a key driver for ensuring that we achieve multiple goals with the same investment, because there is a limited amount of investment that's going through, and we know that we're going to have to achieve not just with public funding, but also with better driving and directing private sector investment. I think another key condition is analyzing the public policy instruments and the tools that exist, making sure that what's on paper is aligned and coordinated. And I really like the initiative that was done in Rwanda. I think this is a really practical starting point that hasn't been done in a lot of countries, and also provides, the fodder and the data on the economic benefits to countries of using a more integrated approach across the land use sector. So I I think that's a really practical first step. And then in practice, which I think is more important in terms of operationalizing, we have to better understand what are the mechanisms and platforms for coordination that help break down these silos. And I think that's where climate change has really been a groundbreaker for the establishment of these multi-sectoral platforms in many countries. I am not advocating for the creation of more platforms. I think we have to do a better job with the existing ones because both at the international and national level, I think we're superseding the capacities of countries to participate in so many different platforms and initiatives. So we have to make better use of them and not just think horizontally, but also think vertically. Because a lot of times we think about these policies at the national level, but when you operationalize in the land use sector, that needs to be done through the extension systems and through the ministries of agriculture that have a reach down to the different actors on the ground, the millions and millions of producers, and especially the smallholders that Esther was mentioning. And I think related to that, agriculture and the ministries of agriculture have a certain remit. They're also not necessarily the focal points for the conventions. I'm not saying that they should be, but we need to create greater ownership in the sector that's responsible for a large part of the land use in rural areas that so many livelihoods depend on. And I think to do this, we need greater institutional innovation. Because we need to think not just about the technologies that are needed, but about the processes that are behind it. Two other key points I wanted to make. One, I think we really need better risk transfer mechanisms to ensure that farmers can take action and that the short-term trade-offs can be covered to ensure this longer-term sustainability that we are advocating for. And part of that is making sure that there's markets for more sustainable products that are produced, let's say, with agroecological methods. And in the case where there's not a market incentive, who covers that risk and who pays the cost of the transition? And finally, a point that I think was also raised in the study done in Rwanda is the need for more integrated monitoring and evaluation systems. Because a lot of actions are already being taken in the sector. There's a lot of actions to diversify. There's a lot of actions to restore lands, to improve grazing lands, to install agroforestry systems. And these are not being captured across the different policy objectives necessarily because of the way that the responsibilities are organized within the ministries. And a key part of this, I think, is, to finish off, is institutional capacity, and I'm talking about the number of people that are there. And in this case, I'll give the specific example of the sustainability units or the climate change units, whatever they're called, in the ministries of agriculture. Honestly, they tend to be 3 to 4 people, and 3 to 4 people, it's really hard for them to be in all these meetings and across all these events. And so we have to think, I think, again, we have these great ideas on a conceptual and theoretical level. How can we create the enabling conditions for operationalizing this in the countries? We can continue to ask more and more, but we can only go a certain level with the way our institutions are currently set up. And that's where, I think that the greater institutional innovation and exchange between countries on how they're actually achieving this is really important. Thanks.
Thank you, Kali, for the summarizing words. I'm just looking at the time. We have 7 minutes left. Martina, should I already hand back to you, or can I still take 2 questions from the audience? 2 questions. Okay, we can take 2 questions. There's one, and if there's another. Okay, so.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, I will. Thank you for that. So my name's Craig Hutton. I'm from the University of Southampton in the UK. I come from a slightly different field, vulnerability assessment to climate change, and we touch on livelihoods. Is there, within agroecology, an assumption that the development of agroecological processes is beneficial to the poorest sectors? This builds a bit on what Esther was saying, but in the Rwandan example, there was no mention of who is benefiting from this great synergy and benefits and money. I assume it's an assumption that the people who were there originally I know from my work in Bangladesh that the improvement in the value of land displaces people on a huge scale. It's more efficient, it's making more money, it's helping with food security, but it's driving migration out of the land. So is it just that there is a tacit assumption that this is true? Or are you missing some figures here, numbers on who is benefiting? I didn't see any numbers on that. I just saw carbon. So how is that addressed? It's clearly important. Should it not be in every presentation? Gender, who's benefiting, you know, because we could be driving people off the land, but it'd be great land.
Okay, we will first, thank you. We will first take the question in the back. There was John. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Harish. I'm from India. My question is basically, I have two questions. Question within a question. So one is with Kelly. I do agree that there is a greater institutional innovation which is required, because having said that, when we are talking about, I do agree a lot of people from this audience also would like to know, when we talk about agroecology, somewhere we are also talking about how we are mainstreaming biodiversity in different sectors. So when, in India, we had a project on Biovision, which is the Biodiversity Finance Initiative, and I'm pretty much sure that Esther will also have a background about it because it was being started from Philippines. So the question here is, how exactly can the three conventions work on innovating and working on these synergies for bringing these actions, especially with respect to their mandates of these conventions? And the second question which I have with Esther is that several times when we are working in the ministries, it is very difficult to spread across the wings in terms of the mandates we have. Like if we are talking about agroecology, the mandate will be mostly with the Ministry of Agriculture, but then it is under the umbrella of Ministry of Environment. So how do you come out of these challenges of working through innovation? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. So the time is very short, so I would give your first question maybe to the panel, and I don't know who would like to answer the first one. And the one that you asked, maybe you can, after the event, you can talk with John, who gave the presentation on agroecology, and discuss this. Yeah, Miriam?
I can. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll be super brief. We do not have enough data. This is really the fact. Who is benefit? And I think it's also an issue of the narrative. Who is benefited from this? The planet. Well, no, actually, we often at the UNCCD would think, yes, this is a convention about land, but in reality, it's a convention about people. So we really need to be working on changing that narrative and in providing the evidence to the policymakers so they can make the changes. That's why we're so grateful to Alisher and to the GIZ, because they were the first ones to give us a number on the savings. So, I mean, I will stop there, because bottom line is, we are still lacking a lot of information, a lot of data, and a lot of packaging in ways that makes better sense for policy making. On the second one, the three Rio conventions do not need to work together. It is the parties and the civil servants in the respective member states that need to work together. I mean, earlier I asked, how many people, I'll ask again, how many of you are national focal points for UNFCCC? Can you raise your hands? Well, now maybe it's a more civil society. But I asked them, and then I asked them how many of you are national focal points for both, for UNFCCC and for UNCCD. Only 2 people in the room raised their hands. We don't need to have the same national focal points, but our national focal points need to talk to each other. I know you guys do, and I'm very happy about that. You need to talk to each other, and you need to work together back at home. Implementation is at the national level. We are here to discuss the lowest common denominators or the high-level policy frameworks, but implementation comes down to the ground. So who needs to work together are the ones who are actually implementing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will have to hand back to Martina, but a big applause to our 4 ladies, Esther, Kelly, Miriam, and Sol. Okay, wait. Can we give the contact of Esther later? I'm encouraging you to talk after the final note also with our panelists after the event, and we will also share the contact of Esther so that you are also able to exchange with the audience. Okay, thank you.
Yes, also a big thank to you, Sophia, and to the panel for this really great food for thought. I think we are at the beginning of a journey, and you all are coming from a national country, so take this with you. I think implementation will not happen at global level. It always happens at national level. So, and I want to hand over, and we're already always running out of time, to Dirk Nemitz. He's the lead of the Agriculture, Forestry and Land Use Unit in the UNFCCC. You have a long-lasting experience with UNFCCC conferences, with intergovernmental processes, and we're really curious to hear your takeaways and maybe your recommendation on the next steps. And I think we are at the beginning of a journey, and we will continue this journey on bringing together the convention at national level.
Thank you, Martina, and good afternoon all. I'm not sure I can add a lot to what was already said. There's a lot of points and a lot of arguments why agriculture and agroecology is extremely important and what we need to do in the Rio Conventions to make this happen. And I think there was a lot of good take-home messages from today, and I'll share a few that I got from the event now. Maybe the single most clear takeaway is that our human minds are imperfect. And we need to compartmentalize the world in order to understand it in different things. And that's what happened in 1992. We put this into different texts that tackle different problems that we compartmentalized. But that's not how nature works. That's not how agriculture works. That's not how ecosystems work. It gives us a nice model for policy and research, and also allows us to create specific indicators for tracking progress and look at things. But it doesn't do justice to what's actually happening. It creates many artificial overlaps, while managing each piece of land requires an integrative approach tailored to this piece of land, taking into account existing policies and land use traditions, taking into account the people that Miriam mentioned. I think that we need to do is sit together and consider what it takes to manage a forest, a grassland, or any other ecosystem, specifically to gain benefits for all the three conventions. This will reveal approaches for implementation of action to address our challenges in a way that creates synergies and avoids duplications that was showed here throughout the event. In other words, it will allow us to achieve a lot more with the same amount of available resources, which was also shown. And we need to achieve a lot more. The resources are limited in all national budgets, in all conventions, in all cooperation and working together. I like the question on what do the conventions do to innovate, and I like Miriam's answer a lot. The conventions are not the place for innovation. The countries are the place for innovation, and what you do in the countries can be brought back to us so that other countries can learn from it, and the innovation can spread around the world. And that's what the conventions do. We gather what you have and we help you to scale it up, but we are not the places for innovation itself. We think all of this is best dealt with at the level of national planning, and this is where it comes naturally. This is where things have to be implemented. This is where the focus is on this forest, is on this agricultural area, is on this wetland. And just as an example from my personal experience, take national strategies and action plans for REDD+ that we received for reducing deforestation, forest degradation, where things get very concrete, where you really have to look into how to address drivers of deforestation. Synergies with biodiversity, with livelihoods, with land degradation, very naturally come into play. Everyone that is working on this puts their synergies into their strategies. This is then also recognized in terms of how can you add non-carbon benefits or whatever you want to call these synergies into existing frameworks. And that helps, I think, at the national level, again, to work together. Brings me to the last point, really, I want to make. We heard a lot about different integrative approaches today, especially agroecology. There's a lot of evidence that, if done right and adapted to the local conditions, these can provide resources and livelihoods in a sustainable manner. What I want to add is, well, we are talking not only about people, all of these things have one other thing in common. They use vegetation to minimize the time that the bare soil is exposed, thus preventing land degradation, preserving biodiversity, contributing to mitigation and adaptation climate action. It's really important not to expose the soil and not to lose the soil in all of this. I look forward to continue working with the 3 sister conventions together on how the benefits and synergies of these approaches can be explored and scaled up further. Thank you very much. My scribbles?
Take a picture of it before you take it forever.
The last part was very beautiful.
I have my phone over there.
Okay, yo te lo saco y te lo
¿Sí?
doy.
¿Me lo pasas? Ah, pues sí, ¿para qué hablamos en inglés así? Sí. Te vi desde hace un rato, te ando siguiendo, en un foro hace poquito de mujeres y land use.
Sí, que